Hey everyone, we're going to look at some economic indicators today. So there are three types. So they are variables and they are used to do these three things. They want to predict likely future economic performance, or they want to assess current economic performance, or they're used to measure economic performance that has already happened. Now, there are three different things there. We're looking at the future, the present, and the past. So we've got different names for these types of indicators. Predicting the future, we're going to call these leading indicators, right? Leading indicators. Then current performance, they are coincident indicators, so happening at the time. And for measuring performance that has already happened, that's going to be a lagging indicator. So it's an indicator that tells us what has already happened. Okay, let's look at leading indicators first. So a big one is consumer confidence. Sometimes you'll see this called consumer sentiment. So you might want to make sure you understand that term, sentiment as in feeling. So if consumers are confident in the future of the economy, it does indicate that they are likely to spend in the future. If you think that your job is safe, you think that the economy is going to go well, you're pretty much saying you will continue to spend money. So it tells us what will happen in the future. Business confidence or business sentiment is the same thing, really, but from businesses. How much are they going to invest? Consumer confidence, consumption, business confidence, investment. If they think the economy is going to go well, their business is going to go well, they will invest for the future. How do they measure this? They take surveys, essentially, of households and businesses about their feelings regarding their economic futures. How do these look? It's an index. Both of these are indices. So it's an index which we take as a base of 100. So anything above 100, if that measure is above 100, is going to be that they're more optimistic than pessimistic. So it's optimism. And below 100 is they're more pessimistic. They think things are going to go poorly than they are optimistic. All right, so we'll look at some examples of this in class. Or it'll be straightforward. We just need to work around it a little bit. And of course, how optimistic and pessimistic they are does talk about what their future spending is, and therefore it tells us what likely future economic activity will be. Okay, other leading indicators, new dwelling approvals. This is what it's called. We don't use the term dwelling much in our everyday life, but it means houses, right? So when a new building is approved, you've got planning permission to build a building, a house generally. That means there will be more economic activity in the future. You're going to have to employ people, carpenters, roofers, electricians, right? You're going to have to buy all the materials to build the house. That is economic activity in the future. Right? So you get the approval at one point, months later, the building starts to happen, the money starts to get spent. Right? Another leading indicator is factory overtime. So when factories start to do a bit more overtime, what that can mean is that they're testing the waters to see if they need to hire more people in the future. If people will do overtime to an extent, but after a while they'll start to say, look, no, we can't do overtime. You need to hire more people. So that's what they will do. It can indicate future hiring, right? So all these people putting in overtime, is it from vastly different eras? That looks really old. This is pretty current, but whatever. More overtime equals eventually more hiring of factory workers. So it can give us an indication of what's going to happen in the future. Okay, coincident indicators. A big one is retail sales. So retail sales can be reported on quite quickly. So it shows changes in consumption spending. So they'll compare retail sales in June of one year to what it was in June of the last year. You would expect them to be slightly more, but if they are less than expected, it tells us what's happening in the economy. If they're more than expected, it tells us what is happening in the economy, right? Also, new vehicle registrations. That's a good way of getting real-time reporting of car sales, right? If you're buying a car, you need to register your car. So new vehicle registrations, the government has that information and that can use that to say, well, look, all these people are buying cars. That tells us something about how the economy is going. And GDP. Yeah, I don't love this one because the GDP data gets published months after the end of the quarter. GDP is generally measured per quarter of a year, so every 3 months. And it takes a long time to put it all together. So once it's published, it's sort of out of date. It's old. In September or August, you might get the data for the quarter that ended at the end of June, right? But it's still considered a coincident indicator, so we have to consider that as such for the exam. And that's because GDP, it still shows the actual stage of the business cycle at the time. So it tells us whether we're in a boom, downturn, etc. Okay, and then we've got our lagging indicators. So we'll start with the inflation rate. Prices will only increase after the increase in aggregate demand occurs. So it takes a while before that scarcity really starts to drive up prices. So firms will use their spare capacity to absorb that extra demand before the shortages start to push the prices up. So it'll happen after if we see the inflation, what that tells us is that there was an increase in aggregate demand in the past. So it's a lagging indicator of economic activity. And then we have the unemployment rate. So to go through this, we'll just look at what firm behavior during a downturn might be. Remember, a downturn, I know I'm not telling you anything you don't know here, but a downturn is when the economic growth rate starts to fall, right? So the firm might recognize a downturn in activity and they might start to cut the hours of existing staff. They just don't need as many staff members on. And then they will, if it continues, they will have to lay off staff. They'll try to avoid it though, because they don't want to cut staff before an upturn, right? Before the economy comes back. And they don't like firing staff. So only when that layoff of staff happens is when the unemployment rate changes. So therefore, the unemployment rate lags behind the change in economic activity, right? So economic activity will drop off before the unemployment rate indicates that less people are in work, right? And it's because firms will try to hold on to staff for a bit. We might cut hours, we'll get that underemployment. We'll remember that. Remember what that is. We might get the underemployment first, but then it'll only be when the unemployment comes, that will only come after the change. So it's a lagging indicator. All right, that's what we need to know about these indicators. Nice short little video. Thank you.